I suppose it should go without saying, but I will say it anyway, that the particular moment that we are in historically makes attempting to say anything of any value extremely challenging. So I will begin the season of atonement. If there's anything said that is unusually difficult, or if anything is left out that ought to be said, there is simply no way to say it all. Okay. Shana Tova. Wishing you all a good and a sweet year. On October 21st, 2024, Yulia Navalny, widow of the leader of the Soviet resistance, Alexei Navalny, was asked if she believed that one day true democracy and freedom would come to Russia. She said without hesitation, "Of course it will. Of course it will." Yulia Navalny is a hero, a magnificently beautiful woman who has made such sacrifice for the cause of freedom and democracy in our world. She has lost so much and maintains such a regal bearing. I don't know what she thinks and says in her private moments, but how she presents to the world is so laudable and so impressive and so elegant and so courageous that I want to remember everything that she has said these last many years and be in awe of the way she has picked up the torch of freedom. Today is Yom HaZikaron. It is actually the truest of our memorial days. This is the day that we remember who we are, what our tradition asks of us, and we pray that God will remember us. I wanted to begin by bringing the image of an extraordinary woman because it is on Rosh Hashanah that we are reminded how God remembered some of the greatest women in our tradition. The Torah readings tell of Sarah, Rachel, and Hannah being remembered by God, making barrenness and conception the locus of divine providence. I'm immensely grateful to the teachings of Professor Rabbi Rachel Edelman, who helped me crystallize many of these thoughts. According to the Talmud, it was on Rosh Hashanah that Sarah, Rachel, who we'll hear a little of tomorrow, and Hannah were remembered. The rabbis of the Talmud say it was on this day that God remembered their plight and their plea and brought them the children for which they longed so dearly. The stories are punctuated by acts of divine intervention. God remembers or takes note of, literally in our language, of these women. Rabbi Eliezer connected the mysterious name of the day, Rosh Hashanah, called a memorial of trumpet blasts. Amazing, David. He connected that to God's remembering those women, Sarah in Genesis, Rachel in Genesis, and Hannah in 1 Samuel. None of those women are mentioned in the 9 acts of remembering that we'll do in a few minutes, but their stories are at the center of the Torah and the Haftarah readings, chosen, I will point out, by men, where God's act of remembering is embedded in a set of complex narratives. The acts of divine healing for these biblical women set up a paradigm for God's memory. For humans, memory is an act of recollection, assembling past events in our mind as a reconstructed narrative. Just as the shofar's horn might curve, its wail rising from low to high pitch, we are taught memory as well is curved. Remembering is a means of reconstructing ourselves then, as we stand in the present now. It's hard to speak of the memory of God, who we say is omniscient. Human memory entails forgetting, but for God, we are told there is no forgetting before your throne of glory. Nothing is hidden from your sight. These biblical stories of God remembering, it's not about God remembering something God had forgotten. Rather, it's about moments in history when the divine presence intervenes by our sacred stories to create significant change. Robert Alter describes these scenes as type scenes, where barrenness and conception becomes the fertile ground for the working of divine providence. In this model of God's act of remembering the women, that's the inspiration for our bared and barren souls on Rosh Hashanah. We come to this day unformed. This is the day of creation. And with it, we pray that something new will begin to grow. The Bible speaks actually only of 6 stories of barren women. It seems like there are more, I know, but there are only 6. Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, the mother of Samson, Hannah, the mother of Samuel, and the Shunammite woman, an acolyte of the prophet Elisha. All of them suffered prolonged periods of infertility, sometimes exacerbated by the presence of a less beloved, though more fertile co-wife. And the barrenness is only relieved by miraculous intervention. Professor Alter suggests that these episodes include variations on an annunciation scene in which a prophet, divine messenger, or even God appears to the woman with the promise of conception. The sons born of these divine intercessions are often heroically given over to the service of God. Sometimes this entails a brush with mortal danger, certainly on behalf of the fathers, or even death and resurrection. Susan Ackerman says, God opens the womb, and God has the right in our sacred stories to demand in some fashion a portion or all of the life that comes from it. This is illustrated on Rosh Hashanah, when we read the fulfillment of God's promise to Sarah on the first day and the near sacrifice of that promised son, Isaac, on the next. In these verses, we are told God took note, God called to mind, God remembered, God revisited. This day is called Hayom Harat Olam, the day that the world was born, or more precisely was conceived or even became pregnant. So the conception of the promised child, the project that we may give birth to this year, is comparable to the creation of the world, eternity condensed into a kernel of time. We remember the women who were remembered on this Rosh Hashanah day. And it is absolutely incumbent upon each and every one of us, as the next generation of Jewish mothers and fathers, to continue to remember the women and men who suffered, and far too many who died nearly 2 years ago. We approach the second commemoration of October 7th. It will be the first day of Sukkot this year, the time of our joy. And I will ask you this morning to please keep in your hearts and in your minds the memory of the human beings who were destroyed on that day, but whose memory must live in our hearts, in our minds, because for far too many people, that memory faded almost immediately. We were blessed on February 8th, 2024, with an account by Beverly Hasid's beloved son, Eric Goldbrenner, who had been in Israel and described what is happening in our world, in far too much of our world, as a war against women. It chilled me to the core. When he was in Israel, he said his cousins and younger women that he met asked him, "Doesn't the world remember October 7th?" And this was early 2024. And Eric said he had to hold their hands and look them in the eye and say, "Most of the world forgot about you on October 8th. I cannot let that stand. The rabbis of our tradition said, on this day, we need to remember the women. And so I'm going to ask you to do the same. There are so many good causes, but one I'd like to ask you to know about is an organization called I Believe Israeli Women. It is a global movement that is standing in solidarity with Israeli women and fighting the denial of and disinformation about the sexual violence of October 7th. Just a few weeks ago, this extraordinary group, under the umbrella of Jewish Women International, unveiled a new book called A Quest for Justice, October 7th and Beyond. It is a comprehensive legal and evidentiary framework to analyze the systematic use of sexual violence as a weapon of war during the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas. It draws on survivors, and so many of them cannot talk, and other testimonies, forensic evidence, international law, and criminal responsibility doctrines, including joint criminal enterprise and derivative liability. The book argues that sexual violence was not incidental that day, but part of a deliberate strategy to destroy the will of a people to go on, to continue to live and to love and to bear children. The hideous attack of that day was not coincidental. It was coordinated. And the women who have put this project together that they call the Dina Project, in memory of Jacob's daughter, the first reported victim in our Torah of a sexual assault. They call this the Dina Project. And these women, if you want to be encouraged and uplifted and awed by the power of brilliant, articulate, courageous women, watch their program. It aired in July. You will be amazed at the erudition, the scholarship, the bearing, the speech, and the compassion of Professor Ruth Halperin Kadari, retired Colonel Sharon Zagagi Pinchas, and retired Judge Nava Ben-Or. Do not despair that there aren't new mothers in Israel, giving birth to extraordinary projects and acting like the daughters of Tzalafechad as pursuers of justice. Like Yulia Navalny, they are up against extraordinary countervailing forces. And yet they persist. I am humbled and amazed to be part of a people that has women and men who pursue justice, who never give up, who say we may be a tiny blip on the screen of the world, but we know what is right, and we will speak for it, and pray for it, and work for it. We say on this day, Hinei Yom Hadin. Today is the day of judgment. I would like to also say, Hayom Yom Dinah. Today is the day of the women, the Dinas, the Sarahs, the Rachels, the Hannahs, and all of the beautiful women and men who were made to leave this world on October 7th, but whose struggle and whose stories must live and be honored by each of us. Today is Yom HaZikaron, the day of memory. Let us remember these brave souls and pledge to work that their stories may yet be told, and that Din and Dinah, justice, may yet pour down like water from the highest heavens. Shana Tova.